The golden cup strikes the marble floor. Wine spreads like blood across white stone. In the throne room of the greatest empire the world has ever known, a single word echoes through pillared halls that stretch beyond sight. The word is no. A queen has refused the king. And in this moment, in this palace where a single command can topple nations, where armies march at the whisper of one man, something impossible has occurred. Defiance. The most powerful man on earth stands before his court, humiliated. His advisors lean close, their whispers urgent and afraid, because they understand what you must understand. In the ancient world, when a queen refuses a king, empires tremble. What comes next will set in motion a chain of events so devastating, so unexpected, that an entire people will stand at the edge of annihilation. And only one woman, hidden behind lies, living in a palace of secrets, will stand between her people and absolute destruction. But to understand how the fate of nations came to rest on the shoulders of this woman, we must first descend into the heart of an empire that stretched from the burning sands of Ethiopia to the mountain kingdoms of India. An empire built on conquest and blood, and the ruins of every kingdom that dared resist its armies. The year is approximately 480 before the birth of the Messiah. The place is Shushan, called Susa by the Greeks, the winter palace of the Persian Empire. Here, in this city of unimaginable wealth, the king sits on a throne that represents dominion over 127 provinces. His name is Ahasuerus, called Xerxes by the Greeks, and he commands the largest military force ever assembled by human hands. His empire is not simply vast, it is overwhelming. From the Indus River to the shores of the Mediterranean, from the steppes of Central Asia to the cataracts of the Nile, all the known world bows to Persian authority. The palace itself defies description. Imagine halls where 1,000 men can stand shoulder to shoulder. Pillars of cedar from Lebanon rise 60 feet to ceilings covered in hammered gold. The walls display glazed bricks in blues and yellows and whites, depicting lions and warriors and sacred bulls with wings. Gardens sprawl across acres, fed by underground channels that bring water from mountain springs 50 miles distant. The throne room alone contains enough silver and gold to ransom a dozen kingdoms. Persian carpets woven with threads of precious metals cover floors of polished stone. Incense burns day and night in golden censers. The very air smells of power. This is the world of the Achaemenid dynasty, the family that crushed Babylon, that humbled Egypt, that turned ancient kingdoms into mere administrative districts. The Persians do not simply conquer. They absorb. They reorganize. They create a system of roads and couriers and laws that binds their empire together with efficiency that will not be matched until Rome. The king's highway stretches from Susa to Sardis, 1,500 miles of paved road where royal messengers ride in relay, covering in 7 days what takes a caravan 3 months. When the king issues a decree in Shushan, within weeks it is known from India to Ethiopia. When the king speaks, the world listens. And it is within this machinery of absolute power that our story unfolds. King Ahasuerus is in the 3rd year of his reign. He is young, ambitious, already planning the great military campaigns that will define his legacy. He dreams of conquering Greece, of extending Persian dominion to the very edge of the Western Sea. But first, he must consolidate his power. He must remind his governors and generals and satraps exactly who commands the greatest empire on earth. And so he throws a feast, not a celebration, a demonstration, a display of wealth and power so extravagant that every nobleman, every military commander, every provincial governor from across the empire will leave Shushan understanding one simple truth: resistance is futile. Persia is eternal. The king is supreme. The feast lasts 180 days, 6 months of continuous celebration. This is not hyperbole. This is historical reality, recorded in the official archives, confirmed by Persian administrative records. For half a year, the nobles of the empire gather in Shushan to witness the wealth of their king. Every day brings new displays. The military parades its strength. Cavalry units from across the empire demonstrate their skill. Immortals, the elite 10,000 warriors who guard the king, stand in formation wearing robes of purple and gold. Tribute flows in from every province. Elephants from India, gold from Arabia, horses from Media, incense from Yemen, precious stones from the far mountains. The message is clear. The Persian Empire is not simply powerful, it is inexhaustible. But Ahasuerus is not finished. When the 6-month display for the nobles concludes, he throws another feast. This one lasts 7 days. This one is for the citizens of Shushan itself, from the greatest to the least. The palace gardens are opened. Couches of gold and silver rest on pavements of marble and precious stone. White and blue linen hangings are fastened with cords of fine purple to silver rings and marble pillars. And the wine flows without limit. Royal wine in golden vessels, each vessel different from the others, abundant according to the king's bounty. The decree goes forth. Let every man drink as he desires. No restrictions, no limits. This is generosity on an imperial scale, calculated to awe, designed to overwhelm. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti holds her own feast for the women in the royal palace. She is beautiful beyond measure, her name meaning beautiful in the ancient Persian tongue. She is of noble blood, possibly descended from the previous dynasty, her lineage connecting the new regime to the old Babylonian royalty. In the ancient world, such marriages cement political alliances, legitimize contested thrones, unite fractious nobility. Vashti is not simply the king's wife. She is a symbol of continuity, of Persian right to rule over conquered Babylon. The feasts continue, day after day. The wine flows, inhibitions fall. And on the 7th day, when the king's heart is merry with wine, he makes a decision that will alter the course of history. He summons his 7 eunuchs, the chamberlains who serve in his presence. Their names are preserved in the ancient records: Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass. 7 men who serve the king's private chambers, who control access to the royal presence. He gives them a command: bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing her royal crown, to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she is beautiful to behold. The command seems simple. The king, celebrating before his nobles and his people, wishes to display his beautiful queen. He wants to crown his demonstration of imperial wealth with the ultimate trophy, a woman of legendary beauty, wearing the royal diadem. But something in this command violates ancient protocol. Something in this demand crosses a line that even a Persian king should not cross. The details are debated by scholars across centuries. Some ancient rabbis suggest the king commanded her to appear wearing only her crown. Others argue that for a queen to display herself before drunken nobles, regardless of her clothing, represents a fundamental violation of royal dignity and Persian custom. What matters is this: Vashti understands that to obey this command is to humiliate herself, to reduce herself from queen to spectacle, to become an object displayed for the entertainment of drunk men. The 7 chamberlains carry the king's command to the queen's feast. They deliver the message, and they wait for her compliance, because in the Persian Empire, no one refuses a royal command. The king's word is law, absolute and unquestionable. To disobey is to invite death. But Queen Vashti refuses. The word comes back to the throne room. The king sits among his princes and nobles, the wine warm in his blood, the triumph of his feast surrounding him, and his messengers return with the impossible. The queen will not come. She has refused the king's command. Silence falls. Imagine it. A throne room filled with the most powerful men in the world. Generals who have commanded armies of hundreds of thousands. Governors who rule provinces larger than most kingdoms. Nobles whose family lines stretch back centuries. And all of them watching the king, waiting to see how he will respond to this unprecedented defiance. The ancient text tells us the king is furious. His anger burns within him. But this is not merely personal rage. This is political crisis. In a system built on absolute obedience, refusal is revolution. If a queen can refuse the king, what message does that send to the 127 provinces? If the king cannot command his own wife, how can he command his empire? The humiliation is not private, it is public, witnessed by every nobleman in the empire. And in the ancient world, witnessed humiliation demands response. The king turns to his advisors. These are not military commanders. These are the wise men who know the times, the legal experts who understand Persian and Median law, 7 princes of Persia and Media who see the king's face, who sit first in the kingdom. Their names echo through the historical record: Karshena, Shetar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. These are the men who interpret law, who advise on matters of protocol and precedent, who understand that what happens in the next moments will establish legal precedent across the empire. The king's question is direct. According to law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not obeyed the command of King Ahasuerus, delivered by the eunuchs? Memucan answers. His response reveals the depth of the crisis. He speaks not just to the king, but before the king and the princes, and his words transform a domestic dispute into a matter of imperial stability. Vashti the queen has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, causing them to look on their husbands with contempt. They will say that King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come. This very day the noble ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. Do you understand what Memucan is saying? He is arguing that Vashti's refusal represents a threat to the entire social order of the empire. If the queen can refuse the king, then every wife in every province might think she can refuse her husband. The foundation of Persian society, built on hierarchy and obedience and patriarchal authority, suddenly appears vulnerable. One woman's no becomes a revolutionary act with the potential to destabilize the domestic sphere across 127 provinces. Memucan continues with his solution. If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes so that it may not be revoked, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This pleases the king and the princes. The solution is elegant. Remove the rebellious queen, replace her with someone obedient, and make the whole affair into a legal precedent that reinforces male authority throughout the empire. The king sends letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that every man should be master in his own household. And so Queen Vashti disappears from the palace, from the historical record, from the story. Her fate is not recorded. Some traditions say she was executed. Others suggest she was simply removed to obscurity, stripped of her title and wealth but allowed to live in exile. The text is silent on her end. What matters is the void she leaves behind. The Persian Empire has no queen, and into that void, the machinery of the empire begins to turn. setting in motion events that will bring a Jewish orphan from the streets of Shushan into the very heart of Persian power. But before we meet this woman who will replace Vashti, we must understand the other population of Shushan, the invisible people, the conquered, the exiled, the Jews. They live in every province of the Persian Empire, scattered like seed across the known world, and they remember. They remember the kingdom they lost. They remember the temple that burned. They remember the long march into captivity, when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and carried away everyone of value, leaving only the poorest of the land to tend vineyards and till fields. That was more than a century ago. Generations have passed. The Jews of Persia have never seen Jerusalem. They were born in exile. Their children were born in exile. Their children's children know Judah only from the stories told by the old ones, from the songs of Zion sung in foreign lands, from the prophecies that promise return and restoration and the rebuilding of the temple. But something has changed. The Persians are not the Babylonians. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, when he absorbed the Babylonian Empire into Persian dominion, he issued a decree that shocked the ancient world. He allowed the exiled peoples to return to their homelands. He specifically mentioned the Jews, authorizing them to return to Jerusalem, to rebuild their temple, even providing funding from the royal treasury. It was unprecedented. Conquerors do not release captives. Empires do not encourage subject peoples to rebuild their national shrines. But Cyrus understood that loyalty can be purchased with tolerance, that allowing peoples to maintain their customs and religions while paying tribute to Persia creates a more stable empire than forced assimilation. Some Jews returned. They went back to Judah, to the ruins of Jerusalem, and began the long work of rebuilding. But most stayed. By the time of Ahasuerus, more Jews live in the Persian Empire than in Judah. They have built lives in Shushan and Babylon and Ecbatana and 100 other cities. They have businesses. They have homes. They speak Aramaic and Persian as fluently as Hebrew. They have adapted to life in the empire while maintaining their distinct identity, worshiping the God of Abraham in foreign lands, keeping the Sabbath in the shadow of pagan temples, preserving the covenant in exile. And among these Jews, in the city of Shushan, lives a man named Mordecai. His full name reveals his history. Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. The genealogy is specific and important. He is from the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe that gave Israel its first king. His ancestor Kish connects him to the royal line of Saul. This is not a random Jew. This is a man with a lineage, with a connection to the Old Kingdom, to the time before exile, when Israel stood independent and proud. The text tells us something crucial about Mordecai. He was carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been carried away with Jeconiah king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon had carried away. This creates a chronological puzzle. The exile of Jeconiah occurred in 597 before the Messiah. If Mordecai was carried away then, he would be impossibly old by the time of Ahasuerus, well over a century. The solution is in the language. The Hebrew can mean that Mordecai's ancestor, likely his great-grandfather Kish, was among those exiled. Mordecai himself was born in Persia, but his family line traces directly back to those who were marched from Jerusalem in chains. This matters. Mordecai lives in exile, but he has not forgotten who he is. He is not assimilated. He maintains his Jewish identity in a Persian city, and he has raised a daughter. Except she is not his daughter, she is his cousin. Her name is Hadassah. In Hebrew it means myrtle, a flowering plant that grows in the land of Judah. But she also has a Persian name, Esther, derived from the Persian word for star, or possibly from the name of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Two names, two identities, Hebrew and Persian, Jewish and assimilated. This duality will define everything that comes after. The text tells her story with economical precision. She is the daughter of Abihail, Mordecai's uncle. When her father and mother die, Mordecai takes her as his own daughter. She is an orphan, raised by her older cousin in a foreign city, belonging to a conquered people living at the mercy of an empire that could turn on them at any moment. But Esther has one quality that will change everything. She is beautiful. The Hebrew uses two words. She is beautiful in form and lovely to behold. Her appearance is striking, memorable, the kind of beauty that draws attention even in a city filled with beautiful women. And in the palace, in the wake of Vashti's removal, a plan takes shape. The king's servants, the young men who attend him, propose a solution to the problem of the missing queen. Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. Let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Shushan the citadel. Let them be given cosmetics and their portion of ointments, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleases the king, and the order goes out across 127 provinces. Bring the beautiful virgins to Shushan. The empire begins its search for a new queen. Understand what this means. This is not an invitation. This is a royal decree. When the king's officers arrive in a city looking for beautiful young women, families do not refuse. To resist is to invite suspicion, punishment, possibly death. The beautiful daughters of the empire are rounded up, gathered, brought to the palace whether they wish it or not. They are taken from their homes, from their families, from any hope of normal life. They enter the harem, and they do not leave. Even those who never see the king, who are never chosen, spend the rest of their lives in the house of the women, concubines maintained by the palace, their virginity or their single night with the king having removed them permanently from normal society. Esther is among those taken. The text is careful here. When the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, when many young women were gathered in Shushan the citadel in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. Was she volunteered by Mordecai, hoping to position her for influence? Was she seized by the king's officers against her will? The text does not say. What matters is the result. A Jewish orphan girl enters the palace, entering a world of unimaginable luxury and deadly danger, carrying a secret that could mean her death. Because Mordecai gives her a command. Esther does not tell anyone about her people or her kindred. She hides her Jewish identity. In a palace full of servants and officials and watchful eyes, she becomes Persian. She speaks Persian. She acts Persian. She worships as a Persian. Or at least, she does not openly worship as a Jew. The secret is absolute. No one knows. And Mordecai walks every day in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther is and what is happening to her. Imagine this moment. An older Jewish man, walking outside the walls of the king's harem, hoping for news of his adopted daughter, who has disappeared behind doors that might never open again. He cannot speak to her. He cannot see her. He can only wait and watch and hope that somehow, in the impossible machinery of Persian imperial politics, this orphan girl might survive. But something unexpected happens in the harem. Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the women, notices Esther. She finds favor in his sight. He is pleased with her. And this is our first hint of the pattern that will define Esther's story. She finds favor. Again and again, in situation after situation, people in power look at this young Jewish woman and choose to help her. Hegai gives her special treatment. He quickly provides her with cosmetics and her portion of food. He gives her 7 chosen young women from the king's palace. He advances her and her young women to the best place in the house of the women. Why? The text does not explain Hegai's motivation. Perhaps he simply recognizes quality, understanding that this young woman has a chance to become queen and wanting to position himself as her ally. Perhaps he is moved by her gentleness, her intelligence, her beauty. Perhaps there is something in her demeanor that inspires loyalty. Whatever the reason, Haggai becomes her advocate. And Esther, keeping her secret, begins her preparation to meet the most powerful man on earth. The preparation takes 12 months, an entire year of beauty treatments prescribed by Persian protocol. 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. The young women are not simply made beautiful. They are transformed, their skin softened and perfumed, their bodies shaped by diet and exercise, their manners refined by instruction in court protocol. They learn how to walk, how to speak, how to recline at feasts, how to please a king whose slightest word is law. They are being prepared not for marriage, but for a single night. One night with the king, and based on that single encounter, one of them will become the most powerful woman in the empire, while the others disappear into the house of the concubines, their lives essentially over before they have truly begun. But something is happening beyond the palace walls, something Esther cannot see from her luxurious prison. The king is planning war. Ahasuerus dreams of conquest, of extending Persian power into Greece, of becoming the king who finally brings the stubborn western kingdoms under Persian dominion. He is gathering armies, stockpiling supplies, building a bridge across the Hellespont, preparing for an invasion that will involve the largest military force ever assembled. The fate of empires is being decided, and in this moment of imperial ambition, the last thing on the king's mind is choosing a new queen. And yet the process continues, because the machinery of the palace operates by its own logic, independent of the king's military plans. When each young woman's turn comes to go in to King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, she is allowed to take whatever she desires from the house of the women to the king's palace. She goes in the evening, and in the morning she returns to the second house of the women in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch who is in charge of the concubines. She does not go in to the king again unless the king delights in her, and she is summoned by name. One night, and then exiled to the house of the concubines, unless the king remembers her name and calls for her again. Most are never called. They spend the rest of their lives in comfortable captivity, neither wife nor free woman, their youth consumed by a system that values their beauty for a single evening and then discards them. Month after month, young women go in to the king. Month after month, they emerge in the morning and disappear into the second harem. The king does not choose. Perhaps none of them strike him as worthy to replace Vashti. Perhaps he is too distracted by military planning to care. Perhaps he enjoys the endless parade of beautiful women without wanting to commit to any single one. The process drags on, and Esther waits, watching girls return with tears or resignation or relief, knowing her turn is coming, carrying a secret that grows heavier with each passing day. But when Esther's turn finally arrives, something extraordinary is about to happen that will set in motion a collision between the hidden purposes of an ancient god and the brutal machinery of the greatest empire the world has ever known. The palace corridors hummed with the ordinary rhythm of power. Servants moved silently between chambers, carrying trays of wine and fruit. Scribes bent over scrolls recording the mundane business of empire. Guards stood at attention beneath columns that had witnessed 100 kings before Xerxes, and would witness 100 more. Everything appeared normal in the citadel of Susa. Everything appeared safe. But in the outer court, 2 men stood in conversation near the king's gate. Their voices were low, barely audible above the footsteps of passing officials. One was a Benjamite named Mordecai, a minor official who recorded matters for the royal archives. The other was a palace guard who had served in the previous reign, a man whose loyalties ran deeper than anyone suspected. Mordecai listened as the guard spoke of schedules, rotations, the changing of posts. ordinary conversation for men who worked within the palace grounds. But Mordecai's eyes had been trained in a harder school than these Persian halls. He had lived through deportation. He had survived Babylon. He knew what conspiracy looked like when wrapped in casual words. The guard moved on, and Mordecai remained at his post, watching the flow of officials and servants. His mind worked through what he had just heard, testing each detail against experience. 2 names had been mentioned, Bigthan and Teresh. Both were eunuchs who guarded the threshold to the king's private chambers. Both had been passed over for promotion 3 months earlier. Both now spoke in corners with voices that died when others approached. The kingdom of Persia had not been built on trust. It had been built on conquest, on the absorption of older civilizations, on the forced loyalty of nations that remembered freedom. Assassination was not an aberration in such an empire. It was a constant possibility, a shadow that followed every throne. Kings who forgot this did not remain kings for long. Mordecai spent 3 days confirming what he suspected. He watched the rotations of the guards. He noted which officials visited the inner chambers and when. He listened to conversations that seemed innocent but carried undertones of grievance. And on the 3rd day, he heard enough to be certain. Bigthan and Teresh were planning to kill the king. The plot was simple, which made it dangerous. Xerxes maintained the custom of his predecessors. Each night, 2 guards stood outside his chamber door. They were the last line of defense, the final barrier between the king and anyone who would do him harm. If those 2 guards became assassins instead of protectors, Xerxes would die before anyone could respond. The throne would pass to whoever moved fastest in the chaos that followed, and in that chaos, the conspirators believed they would find reward rather than execution. Mordecai faced a choice that would have paralyzed a lesser man. He was a Jew living in a Persian empire. His people had no official standing, no guaranteed protection beyond the general tolerance that Xerxes extended to subject peoples. To involve himself in palace politics was to risk drawing attention. To save the king was to create a debt that might never be paid. To remain silent was to allow murder. But Mordecai was not a man who calculated safety above duty. He had raised Esther when her parents died. He had taught her the laws of Moses, in a land that worshipped other gods. He had kept alive the memory of Jerusalem in a generation that had known only exile. For such a man, the choice was clear, even if the consequences were not. He sent word to Queen Esther through the network of servants, who moved between the outer court and the royal harem. The message was brief, coded in language that would mean nothing to casual ears, but everything to the woman who received it. 2 names, 1 warning, a life in the balance. Esther had been queen for nearly 4 years. She had learned the rhythms of the palace, the unspoken rules that governed survival. She knew that approaching the king without being summoned was death. She knew that even a queen existed at the pleasure of her husband, and that pleasure could vanish like morning dew. But she also knew that some information could not wait for protocol. She took the risk. She requested an audience, and because she had been wise in those 4 years, because she had cultivated favor without demanding it, because she had remained beautiful without becoming threatening, the king granted her request. Xerxes listened as Esther delivered Mordecai's warning. The king's face revealed nothing, but his hand moved to the armrest of his throne with enough force to show his anger. He summoned his most trusted officials. He ordered an investigation, and within hours the plot was confirmed. Bigthan and Teresh were arrested at their posts. They were questioned with the efficiency that characterized Persian justice. They confessed under methods that left no room for deception, and before the sun set on that day, both men were impaled on stakes outside the palace walls, their bodies displayed as a warning to anyone else who might confuse proximity to power with possession of it. The king ordered the matter recorded in the royal chronicles, the vast collection of scrolls that documented every significant event in the empire. Mordecai's name was written there, along with the service he had rendered. It was the kind of notation that should have led to immediate reward, to promotion and wealth, and the favor that powerful men bestowed on those who saved their lives. But the chroniclers were busy men, and the kingdom was vast, and 100 other matters demanded the king's attention. The entry was made, the scroll was sealed, the record was stored in the royal archives where it would remain until someone had reason to retrieve it. And Mordecai returned to his post at the king's gate with no reward beyond the knowledge that he had done what was right. Esther returned to the women's quarters with a secret that would have destroyed everything if revealed. She had acted on behalf of her cousin, the Jew who sat at the king's gate. She had risked the king's displeasure to deliver a message from a man whose relationship to her was unknown. One careless word, one suspicious question, and her true identity would be exposed. But she had trusted Mordecai's wisdom, and that trust had proven true. Weeks passed. Seasons changed. The palace moved through its endless cycles of feast and administration, judgment and celebration. The foiled assassination became another story, another testament to the king's divine protection, another reason the empire remained strong while lesser kingdoms fell. But while the palace forgot, another man remembered. His name was Haman. He was an Agagite, descended from a line that traced itself back to kings who had ruled before the Persians, before the Babylonians, before the great reshaping of the world. In another age, his ancestors had been sovereigns. In this age, he was a minister in a foreign court, climbing toward power through service to a throne that was not his birthright. Haman had been useful to Xerxes in the way that certain men are useful to kings. He understood administration. He knew how to make the machinery of empire function smoothly. He could translate the king's desires into edicts that reached from Susa to the edges of the known world. And perhaps most importantly, he knew how to make himself indispensable without becoming threatening. The king rewarded such competence with promotion. Haman rose through the ranks of officials, accumulating titles and authority. Other ministers watched his ascent with the mixture of envy and calculation that characterized court life. Some sought his favor, others plotted his downfall. None could deny his effectiveness. And then came the day when Xerxes elevated Haman above all other nobles, placing him in a position of authority, second only to the king himself. The decree went out through the provinces. Haman was to be honored. When he passed through the king's gate, all officials were to bow before him. His word carried the weight of royal command. His favor became the pathway to advancement. His displeasure became the road to ruin. The nobles bowed. The officials prostrated themselves. The guards rendered the honors due to a man who stood at the right hand of power. The entire machinery of Persian protocol adjusted to acknowledge Haman's elevation. But at the king's gate, one man remained standing. Mordecai had bowed to kings when circumstances required it. He had shown respect to officials who held legitimate authority. He had navigated the complex hierarchy of Persian power with the wisdom that had kept him alive through decades of exile. But this was different. This was not respect. This was worship, and worship belonged to God alone. The law of Moses was clear on this matter. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not bow down to them nor serve them. The prohibition was not merely ritual, it was identity. It was the boundary that separated those who followed the covenant from those who followed the customs of nations. To bow before Haman in the manner demanded was to cross that boundary, and Mordecai would not cross it. Day after day, Haman passed through the king's gate. Day after day the officials bowed, and day after day Mordecai remained upright, his eyes level, his posture unchanged. At first, the other officials assumed he had not heard the decree. Then they assumed he was mad. Then they began to understand that his refusal was deliberate, and their whispers took on an edge of fear. They approached Mordecai between Haman's visits, their voices urgent with warning. Did he not understand the risk? Did he not realize that defiance of this magnitude could not be ignored? The king had commanded honor for Haman. To refuse was to defy the king himself. Execution had come for lesser offenses. Mordecai listened to their warnings with the patience of a man who had made his choice before the question was even asked. He explained his reason with a simplicity that made his resolve clear. He was a Jew. He bowed to God alone. No decree, no matter how royal its origin, could change that fact. The officials left him with something between pity and anger. Some admired his principle. Others considered him a fool. All agreed that his defiance would not remain secret for long. They were correct. Haman noticed the standing figure during his third passage through the gate. His eyes, trained to catch signs of disrespect in a court where respect was currency, fixed on Mordecai with sudden intensity. Here was a man who did not bow when others prostrated themselves. Here was a challenge to the honor that the king had commanded. Haman said nothing that day. He continued through the gate with his retinue, his face revealing none of the anger that had begun to burn in his chest. But he made inquiries. Who was this man? What position did he hold? And most importantly, why did he dare to refuse the honor that everyone else rendered? The answers came quickly. Mordecai was a minor official, a keeper of records, a man of no particular importance in the vast hierarchy of the empire. But there was one detail that caught Haman's attention like a hook catching flesh. Mordecai was a Jew. For another man, this information might have meant little. The empire contained dozens of conquered peoples, each with their own customs and laws. Persian tolerance extended to all who paid tribute and kept peace. But for Haman the Agagite, the word carried a weight of history that transformed irritation into hatred. His ancestors had been Amalekites, the tribe that attacked Israel in the wilderness after the exodus from Egypt, the tribe that God had commanded Saul to destroy utterly, holding back nothing, the tribe that Saul had failed to annihilate, sparing their king Agag against divine command. That failure had cost Saul his throne and his dynasty, and the descendants of Agag had not forgotten. Ancient enmity has a way of sleeping through generations, buried beneath the concerns of daily survival, masked by the passage of time, but it never truly dies. It waits for a moment to awaken, for a catalyst to transform memory into action. And in the space between Haman's realization that Mordecai was a Jew and his decision about what to do next, centuries of hatred condensed into present rage. But Haman was not a fool. He did not rise to his position by acting on impulse. He understood that in a court where perception shaped reality, every action had to be calculated for maximum effect. To punish one Jew for refusing to bow would satisfy immediate anger, but achieve little lasting impact. The other officials would whisper about tyranny. The king might question why such a minor offense required such severe response. No, if Haman was going to act, he would act in a way that could not be questioned. He would act in a way that would not only destroy Mordecai, but eliminate the entire problem that Mordecai represented. He would act in a way that would satisfy the ancestral hatred that had been awakened. He would destroy all the Jews in the Persian Empire. The idea took shape in Haman's mind with the terrible clarity that marks truly monstrous decisions. The Jews were scattered throughout the provinces, living in cities and towns from India to Ethiopia. They maintained their separate customs. They worshiped their own God. They refused to fully assimilate into the cultures that surrounded them. In short, they were perfect scapegoats for a man who needed to frame genocide as policy. But Haman also knew that he could not approach the king with obvious revenge. Xerxes was many things, but he was not stupid. A proposal to massacre an entire people because one man refused to bow would be rejected as disproportionate, the action of a petty tyrant rather than a wise administrator. The case would have to be made carefully, framed in terms that appealed to the king's interests rather than Haman's grudges. So Haman began to build his argument with the skill of a man who understood power. He gathered information about the Jews scattered throughout the empire. He noted their population centers, their economic activities, their religious practices. He compiled evidence of their separateness, their refusal to fully embrace Persian customs. He prepared to present them not as individuals but as a threat, not as neighbors but as subversives. And he waited for the right moment to approach the king. That moment came in the 12th year of Xerxes' reign, in the first month of the Persian calendar, the month called Nisan, when spring touched the empire and the king's attention turned to matters of administration and law. Haman had timed his approach with precision, choosing a moment when the king was receptive to proposals, when other ministers were occupied with their own concerns, when the court's attention was divided among a dozen different matters. He entered the throne room with the confidence of a man who held the second highest position in the empire. He approached the king with the deference that was always wise, regardless of one's rank, and he began to speak with the careful persuasion of someone who knew exactly what fears to awaken. There was a certain people, Haman explained, scattered throughout the provinces of the empire. They were different from all other peoples. They kept themselves separate. They followed their own laws rather than the laws of the king. Their customs were strange. Their loyalties were suspect. And most dangerously, they rendered no real benefit to the empire while occupying positions in every province. This was the heart of Haman's argument, the central lie around which all other deceptions would orbit. He did not speak of Mordecai's refusal to bow. He did not mention personal grievance or ancient enmity. Instead, he framed the Jews as a problem of governance, a threat to stability, a people whose very existence complicated the smooth functioning of imperial power. It was, in many ways, a familiar argument. Empires have always needed scapegoats, groups that could be blamed when things went wrong, populations that could be sacrificed to satisfy the demands of those who held power. The Jews, with their insistence on maintaining distinct identity, their worship of an invisible God, their adherence to laws that set them apart, made perfect targets for such manipulation. But Haman knew that fear alone might not be enough to convince Xerxes. Kings were practical men. They weighed costs against benefits. They considered consequences. So Haman added the element that would transform his proposal from persecution into policy. He would pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury. The sum was staggering. 10,000 talents represented a substantial portion of the empire's annual revenue. It was wealth that could fund armies, build monuments, secure alliances. It was the kind of money that made even powerful kings pause and consider proposals they might otherwise reject. Where would Haman obtain such wealth? From the Jews themselves. Their property would be confiscated, their goods seized, their accumulated wealth transferred to those who carried out the king's decree. Haman would organize the appropriation, ensuring that the royal treasury received its share, while those who participated in the destruction would be rewarded for their service. It was genocide framed as economic policy, murder dressed in the language of imperial finance. Xerxes listened to Haman's proposal with the expression that had become habitual through years of receiving countless petitions and proposals. His face revealed nothing of his thoughts. His posture suggested neither agreement nor rejection. He was a king who had learned to conceal reaction until decision was made. But inwardly, Haman's words had found their mark. The empire was vast and expensive to maintain. The military campaigns against Greece had drained resources without producing the decisive victory that Xerxes had sought. 10,000 talents of silver would ease many pressures. And if Haman was correct about these Jews being a source of instability, then removing them would serve multiple purposes. The king made his decision with the swift finality that characterized absolute power. He removed his signet ring from his finger and handed it to Haman. The gesture was unmistakable. The ring bore the royal seal, the mark that authenticated any decree as carrying the king's full authority. To possess the ring was to speak with the king's voice, to transform words into law that could not be challenged or revoked. "Keep the money," Xerxes said, "but do with the people as you see fit." In that moment, with those words and that gesture, the fate of every Jew in the Persian Empire was sealed. Haman had been given absolute authority to carry out his plan. The wealth of the Jews would be his to distribute. Their lives were forfeit, and all of it had been accomplished without the king understanding the personal vendetta that motivated the entire scheme. Haman left the throne room with the royal ring on his finger and murder in his heart, but what he did next would make even genocide seem merciful. The night before her unsummoned approach to the throne, Esther does not sleep. She lies in her chambers, staring into the darkness, knowing that when morning comes, she will either save her people or die in the attempt. The fast has ended. Her strength is depleted. Her body is weak, but her resolve has crystallized into something harder than Persian gold. The dawn breaks over Susa with a crimson sky that looks like spilled blood across the horizon. In Jewish tradition, such a sky is an omen. Whether of judgment or deliverance, no one can say. Esther rises. She bathes. She anoints herself with the royal oils. She adorns herself not as a woman going to plead for mercy, but as a queen preparing for war. Every garment is chosen with precision, every jewel placed with intention. She is dressing for survival, for seduction, for sovereignty. She knows that Xerxes is a man who responds to beauty, to spectacle, to power displayed in feminine form. She will use every weapon in her arsenal. The palace servants who attend her say nothing, but their hands tremble as they fasten her robes. They have heard whispers of what is coming. They know that no one, not even a queen, approaches the throne without summons and expects to live. The law is ancient. The law is absolute. 4 years have passed since Vashti was removed for a single act of defiance. What will happen to a queen who violates the most sacred protocol of the empire? Esther looks at herself in the polished bronze mirror. The face that stares back at her is beautiful, yes, but also haunted. She sees not just herself, but the faces of all those who depend on her. Mordecai, the children in the Jewish quarter, the old men who remember Jerusalem, the young women who have never seen the Promised Land, but carry it in their hearts. She is their only hope, their only voice, their only chance. She leaves her chambers. The corridors of the palace are longer than she remembers. Each step echoes against marble floors that have witnessed the footfalls of conquered kings dragged to their executions. The walls are decorated with reliefs of battles, of enemies crushed beneath Persian chariots, of tribute flowing from every corner of the earth to the feet of the king. This is the house of absolute power. This is the throne that answers to no one. The inner courtyard lies ahead. Beyond it, the throne room. The guards at each passage stiffen as she approaches. They know what she is doing. They know it is forbidden, but she is the queen, and they cannot stop her without direct orders. They let her pass, but their eyes follow her with a mixture of awe and pity. They are watching a woman walk to her death. Esther reaches the entrance to the inner courtyard. She pauses. This is the threshold. Once she crosses it, there is no turning back. If she enters that courtyard, and the king does not extend his golden scepter, the guards will seize her. They will drag her away. She will be executed as a violator of Persian law, and the Jews will lose their only advocate. The decree will stand. The 13th of Adar will come. The slaughter will proceed. But if she does not cross this threshold, the same doom awaits, only slower, only more certain. She thinks of Mordecai's words, Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This is the time. This is the moment. Everything has led to this threshold. Her beauty contest victory, her concealed identity, her years of favor with Xerxes, her discovery of the assassination plot, Haman's rise, the casting of the pur, the decree, the fast. Everything has been preparation for this single act of courage. Esther steps into the courtyard. The space is open to the sky. The morning sun pours down like the gaze of heaven itself, illuminating her as she walks forward. The throne room lies directly ahead, its massive doors standing open. Inside, she can see the throne, and on the throne the king. Xerxes sits in his royal robes, conducting the business of empire. Nobles surround him. Scribes record his words. Haman stands at his right hand, whispering counsel into his ear. The machinery of Persian power is in full operation. No one has noticed her yet. She continues walking. Her steps are measured, deliberate. She moves like a woman walking through water, pushing against the current of fear, of law, of death itself. Every instinct screams at her to turn back, to run, to save herself. But she does not turn back. She does not run. She walks forward into the jaws of judgment. A guard sees her first. His eyes widen. He touches the arm of another guard. That guard stiffens, turns, stares. Within seconds, every eye in the throne room is fixed on the queen, who has appeared unsummoned in the forbidden courtyard. The nobles stop talking. The scribes stop writing. The very air seems to stop moving. Haman sees her. His face registers confusion, then alarm. This was not in his plans. The queen has been invisible, irrelevant to his schemes. What is she doing here? Violating protocol? Demanding attention? He glances at the king, trying to read his reaction. Xerxes himself has not yet noticed. He is listening to a report about tax collection from a distant province. Then someone near him falls silent mid-sentence. Then another. The king looks up, irritated at the interruption. He follows the gaze of his courtiers. He sees Esther. For a moment that stretches like eternity, the king simply stares at his queen. His face is unreadable. The golden scepter rests in his hand, but his hand does not move. The law is clear. She has violated sacred protocol. She stands in the forbidden space. She has forced herself into his presence without invitation, without permission, without right. By the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be altered, she should die. Esther stands perfectly still. She does not speak. She does not plead. She simply stands there in her royal robes, beautiful and terrible, a woman who has chosen to risk everything rather than hide in safety while her people perish. She is giving Xerxes a choice. Will he uphold the law and destroy her, or will he extend mercy and listen? The seconds pass like drops of blood from a wound. The nobles hold their breath. Haman's jaw tightens. The guards' hands drift toward their weapons, waiting for the signal. If the king gives the word, they will seize her. If the king remains silent, they will seize her. Only one gesture can save her now. Only the extension of the golden scepter. Xerxes looks at Esther, and in that look, something shifts. He sees not just a woman who has violated protocol, but the queen he chose. The woman who saved his life by reporting the assassination plot. The wife who has brought him 4 years of pleasure and peace in his household. He sees her courage in standing before him now, knowing she might die, and perhaps, in some deep place, he sees that this is no ordinary petition, no ordinary visit. Something of grave importance has brought her here. The king's hand moves. The golden scepter extends. The relief that floods through the throne room is almost audible. Guards relax. Nobles exhale. Haman's eyes narrow with suspicion. Esther, who has been prepared to die, feels her knees weaken with survival, but she does not collapse. She walks forward. She approaches the throne. She reaches out and touches the top of the golden scepter, accepting the mercy the king has granted. Xerxes speaks. His voice carries the weight of absolute authority, but also curiosity. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your petition?" "It shall be given to you even to half of my kingdom." It is a standard royal formula, an expression of favor, but it is also a genuine offer. Xerxes is intrigued. Esther has risked death to come before him. Whatever she wants must be of supreme importance. He is prepared to be generous, prepared to grant whatever she requests. But Esther does not make her request. Not yet. She has not crossed the threshold of death to rush her plan now. She has thought this through. She knows that timing is everything. She knows that Xerxes must be in the right frame of mind. She knows that Haman must be present, confident, unsuspecting. So instead of revealing the conspiracy, instead of denouncing the decree, instead of exposing Haman, she makes a smaller request. "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for him." A feast, nothing more, an invitation to dinner. It seems anticlimactic. The nobles are puzzled. The king risked violating Persian law to grant her audience, and all she wants is to host a banquet? But Xerxes is pleased. He enjoys feasts. He enjoys the company of his beautiful queen. And he is curious. What is she planning? What does she really want? He agrees immediately. He turns to Haman. "Hurry and bring Haman, so that we may do as Esther has requested." Haman is summoned. He is told the queen has invited him to a private feast with the king. His pride swells. He is not just the second most powerful man in the empire. He is now a personal friend of the royal couple, dining privately with them. This is an honor beyond measure. This confirms his status. This proves his ascendancy. He hurries to prepare himself, not knowing he is being drawn into a trap. That afternoon, the feast takes place in Esther's private quarters. The setting is intimate, just the three of them, king, queen, and prime minister. The food is exquisite. The wine flows freely. The conversation is pleasant. Esther plays the perfect hostess, charming and gracious, making sure both men are comfortable, satisfied, pleased. She gives no hint of the storm about to break. She gives no indication that she is anything other than a devoted queen, honoring her husband and his most trusted advisor. As the feast progresses, Xerxes grows increasingly curious. He can sense there is something beneath the surface. Esther did not risk her life just to throw a dinner party, so as they drink wine, he asks again, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." This is her moment. The king has asked directly. He has promised to grant her petition. She could speak now. She could expose Haman. She could reveal the decree. She could save her people with a word. But still, she waits. "My petition and my request is this," she says carefully. "If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them. Tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Another feast, another delay. The tension stretches tighter. Xerxes is now deeply intrigued. What is she doing? What game is she playing? But he is also entertained. The mystery appeals to him. He agrees. Tomorrow they will feast again. Tomorrow she will make her request known. Haman leaves the palace that evening, walking on air. He has been honored twice in one day, invited to private feasts with the king and queen, called by name, treated as family. His plans are working perfectly. In less than 11 months, the Jews will be exterminated. And he, Haman the Agagite, will stand unchallenged as the greatest man in Persia after the king himself. He walks through the city gate in his magnificent robes, his chest swollen with pride, and there, As always, sits Mordecai, the Jew who refuses to bow, the man whose defiance started this entire chain of events. The sight of Mordecai still sitting, still refusing to honor him, sends a spike of rage through Haman's euphoria. Even now, even with everything he has achieved, even with the destruction of the Jews assured, this one man will not bow. Haman restrains himself. He does not speak to Mordecai. He does not acknowledge him. He continues home, but the poison of that moment goes with him. When he arrives at his house, he gathers his wife Zeresh and all his friends. He needs to hear himself praised. He needs to drown out the sight of Mordecai's defiance with the sound of his own glory. He tells them everything: his wealth, his 10 sons, his promotions, his power, and the king has advanced me above all the princes and servants. Moreover, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come with the king to the feast she prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. It is a litany of triumph, but then his voice changes. Yet all this is worth nothing to me, as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. There it is, the confession. Despite everything he has, one man's refusal to bow is eating him alive. His wife and friends see his torment. They offer a solution. Let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high. In the morning, tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. 50 cubits, 75 feet high. A structure so tall the entire city will see the body hanging from it. A monument to Haman's power. A warning to any who dare defy him. The suggestion delights Haman. Yes, perfect. He orders the gallows, constructed immediately. Carpenters work through the night, building the instrument of Mordecai's death. By dawn, it stands ready, a tower of execution visible from every corner of Susa. Haman goes to bed satisfied. Tomorrow he will petition the king for Mordecai's execution. Then he will attend the queen's feast. His triumph will be complete. The Jew who defied him will be dead. The Jews who threaten his legacy will be doomed. Everything is falling into place. But that night, the king cannot sleep. This is no ordinary insomnia. This is the hand of the divine moving in the darkness. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who has seemed absent, who has not spoken, who has not intervened, is now acting, not with thunder, not with angels, not with miracles, but with a sleepless night, with a restless mind, with a king who cannot close his eyes. Xerxes lies awake in his bed. He tosses. He turns. Sleep will not come. Finally, he orders that the book of memorable deeds, the chronicles of his reign, be brought and read to him. Perhaps hearing the records of his kingdom will bore him into sleep. Perhaps reviewing the history of his rule will quiet his mind. The servant brings the scrolls. He begins to read. He recounts various events, various decisions, various moments, and then he comes to a passage from 5 years earlier. The report of Bigthana and Teresh, the 2 eunuchs who conspired to assassinate the king, the report of how the plot was discovered, the report of who brought the information to the authorities. It was Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Xerxes sits up in bed. Mordecai, that name registers. A man saved his life, and what reward has he received? The king asks the question aloud. What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The servants check the records. Nothing has been done for him. This troubles Xerxes. In Persian culture, loyalty to the king must be rewarded. A man who saves the king's life should be elevated, honored, enriched. The fact that nothing has been done for Mordecai is an oversight, an injustice. It must be corrected. The king decides that first thing in the morning, he will remedy this situation. He will honor Mordecai publicly. He will give him the recognition he deserves. Dawn breaks. Xerxes is still awake. He rises and enters the outer court. At that same moment, Haman arrives. He has come early, eager to request permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows he has prepared. He is rehearsing his words, he is planning his argument, he is ready to strike the final blow against his enemy. A servant announces to the king that Haman has arrived and is waiting in the court. Perfect timing. Xerxes needs advice on how to honor someone. Haman is his most trusted counselor. He will know the right protocol. Let him come in, the king commands. Haman enters the throne room. He bows. He prepares to make his request about Mordecai. But before he can speak, the king poses a question. What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Haman's heart soars. Whom would the king delight to honor more than me, he thinks. Obviously, Xerxes is planning to bestow some new honor upon him. This is why he has been summoned. The king wants his advice on how to honor him. Haman's pride, already inflated to bursting, expands further. He imagines the greatest honors possible, and in his arrogance, he describes them. For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." It is a fantasy of supreme exaltation, to wear the king's robes, to ride the king's horse, to be crowned, to be paraded through the city with royal proclamation. It is everything Haman desires, everything his ego craves. He describes it in detail, savoring the image. The king listens. He nods. "Excellent," he says. "Make haste. Take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." The words hit Haman like a physical blow. Mordecai. The Jew, the man he hates, the man he has built gallows to hang, the man whose entire race he has condemned to death. That Mordecai is to receive the highest honor Haman could imagine. And he, Haman, the prime minister, is commanded to perform the ceremony, to dress his enemy in royal robes, to lead him through the streets, to proclaim his honor to all of Susa. Haman cannot refuse. He cannot protest. The king has given a direct command. He must obey. He leaves the palace in a daze of horror. He retrieves the royal robes. He brings the royal horse. He goes to the king's gate where Mordecai sits. And there, before the eyes of everyone who has watched Mordecai refuse to bow to him, Haman must now bow to Mordecai, must dress him, must honor him, must exalt him. Mordecai, who understands what is happening, allows himself to be dressed. He mounts the royal horse, and Haman leads him through the streets of Susa, crying out the proclamation the king commanded. "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." The Jews of Susa hear the proclamation. They see Mordecai riding in royal robes. They see Haman leading the horse, and they do not understand. 11 months from now, they are supposed to be exterminated. But today, one of their own is being honored by the king himself. What does this mean? Has something changed? Is there hope? But no decree has been issued reversing the 13th of Adar, and the Jewish people watched as everything they feared was about to crystallize into unspeakable reality. The dawn broke over Shushan on the 15th day of Adar, and the city was quiet for the first time in 3 days. The bodies had been removed. The blood had been washed from the streets. But something fundamental had changed in the empire, something that could never be undone. The Jewish people had not merely survived, they had demonstrated their power. They had shown that they could defend themselves. They had proven that their enemies could be defeated. And more importantly, they had done so with the full backing of imperial law and the support of the Persian throne itself. But the victory had come at a staggering cost to their enemies. 75,000 men across the empire had fallen in those 3 days. In Shushan alone, 800 had died, including the 10 sons of Haman, whose bodies Esther had ordered displayed on gallows as a warning to anyone who might still harbor thoughts of violence against her people. The decision had been calculated, brutal, necessary. The sons of Haman carried their father's hatred, his legacy, his network of conspirators. As long as they lived, they represented a rallying point for those who wanted to finish what Haman had started. Esther understood that mercy in this moment would be interpreted as weakness, and weakness would invite future attacks. So she had made the choice that queens must sometimes make. She had chosen survival over sentiment. She had chosen her people over her conscience. The empire watched and learned. The Jews were no longer victims. They were a people to be reckoned with. Mordecai moved through the palace with the quiet confidence of a man who had been vindicated by history itself. He wore the royal robes that Ahasuerus had given him, the signet ring that bore the king's authority, the chain of gold that marked him as second only to the throne. But he wore them differently than Haman had. Where Haman had demanded honor, Mordecai simply commanded it. Where Haman had sought to elevate himself, Mordecai elevated his people. He understood what few men in his position ever grasp. Power is not about making others bow. Power is about what you do for those who cannot do for themselves. He established Jewish communities throughout the empire as protected entities under Persian law. He created a network of officials, scribes, and administrators drawn from his own people, ensuring that Jews held positions of influence in every province. He reformed the tax system to be more equitable, reducing the burden on the poorest citizens and eliminating some of the corruption that had enriched men like Haman. He became known as Mordecai the Jew, and he wore that identity proudly, never once attempting to hide his heritage or assimilate into Persian culture. He remained faithful to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his faithfulness became a testament throughout the empire. But he also did something else, something that would ensure his legacy endured far beyond his lifetime. He ordered that the events of these days be recorded. He commissioned scribes to write down everything that had happened, from the moment he overheard the conspiracy against the king, to the moment the Jewish people celebrated their deliverance. He wanted the story preserved, not for his own glory, but so that future generations would remember, so that they would know that God had not abandoned them, even in exile, so that they would understand that deliverance can come from the most unlikely places, through the most unlikely people. And so the scroll was written, the Megillah, the Book of Esther. Esther herself withdrew somewhat from public life after the crisis had passed. She had played her role, she had done what was required, but the cost had been greater than anyone knew. She had lived with the constant threat of death. She had endured the psychological warfare of the harem, the political maneuvering of the court, the weight of an entire nation's survival resting on her shoulders. She had been forced to hide her identity, to suppress her faith, to navigate a world where one wrong word could mean execution. And when the moment came, she had been forced to make decisions that no one should ever have to make. How many should die so that her people could live? Where is the line between justice and vengeance? When does self-defense become something darker? These questions haunted her in the quiet moments. But she also knew that she had fulfilled her purpose. She had been placed in her position for such a time as this, and she had not failed. Her people lived, her legacy was secure, and though the palace remained her prison, it was now a prison she had transformed. She was no longer the frightened girl who had been taken from her home. She was Esther the queen, Esther the deliverer, Esther whose name would be remembered as long as the Jewish people endured. The festival of Purim was established to commemorate the deliverance. The 14th and 15th days of Adar became days of feasting and celebration, days when the story would be retold, when the scroll would be read aloud, when Jews everywhere would remember that they had been saved from destruction. The festival carried with it certain traditions: the reading of the Megillah, the scroll of Esther, in the synagogue, the giving of gifts to one another and to the poor, ensuring that everyone could participate in the celebration, regardless of their wealth. The feast, elaborate and joyful, because those who were marked for death now lived in freedom, and the tradition of making noise whenever Haman's name was read, drowning out his memory, refusing to let his legacy be honored even in the retelling of his defeat. But Purim carried something else as well. It carried a subtle recognition of the ways God works in the world. The book of Esther is unique among the biblical texts because it never mentions God by name, not once. There are no prophets, no visions, no voices from heaven, no explicit miracles. And yet God's presence saturates every page. He is there in the timing, in the coincidences that are too perfect to be coincidence, in the way Esther just happens to be chosen as queen at exactly the moment when a queen would be needed to save the Jewish people. He is there in the sleepless night that prompts a king to read his chronicles at precisely the right moment. He is there in the courage of a young woman who had every reason to stay silent. God works in Esther not through supernatural intervention, but through human choice, human courage, human faithfulness. This became the lesson that Jews in exile would carry with them through the centuries. God does not always announce his presence with thunder and earthquake. Sometimes he works in silence, in the background, through circumstances that seem random but are actually orchestrated. Sometimes he places ordinary people in extraordinary positions and waits to see if they will rise to the occasion. Sometimes deliverance comes not from heaven but from within, from the choices we make when everything is on the line. The empire itself continued to evolve. Ahasuerus remained on the throne, but his legacy was forever bound to the events of those years. History would remember him not primarily as a conqueror or administrator, but as the king whose queen saved a nation. In some ways, this was fitting. He had been a weak king, easily manipulated, prone to rage, governed by his appetites. But in his weakness, he had allowed space for someone stronger to emerge. He had elevated Esther. He had empowered Mordecai. And in doing so, he had enabled something greater than himself. Mordecai remained in power for the rest of his life, and the chronicles of the Persian kings recorded his deeds. He became one of the most prominent Jews in history, a man who had risen from exile to stand beside the most powerful ruler in the world. But he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot his people. He never forgot the God who had preserved them through centuries of exile and would preserve them still. The story of Esther spread throughout the ancient world. It became a source of hope for oppressed people everywhere. Here was a story where the powerless triumphed over the powerful, where a woman changed the course of history, where faith and courage mattered more than armies and wealth, where the intended victims became the victors, and the architect of genocide ended up hanged on his own gallows. The reversal was complete, poetic, divinely orchestrated. But the story also carried warnings. It warned against the dangers of pride, the way that men like Haman destroy themselves through their own arrogance. It warned against anti-Semitism, showing that those who plot the destruction of the Jewish people end up destroyed themselves. It warned against the abuse of power, the way that systems of oppression eventually collapse under their own weight. And it warned that hidden identities cannot remain hidden forever, that truth eventually comes to light, that justice may be delayed, but it is not denied. The Jewish people never forgot what Esther had done. Her name became synonymous with courage, with sacrifice, with the willingness to risk everything for the sake of her people. Mothers named their daughters Esther, hoping they would grow to embody her strength. Rabbis told her story, drawing lessons about faith and providence. Artists depicted her standing before the king, the moment when everything hung in the balance. She became a symbol of Jewish survival, proof that even in the darkest exile, even when all hope seemed lost, deliverance could come. But there were also those who questioned her methods. Had the violence gone too far? Was it necessary to kill so many? Could Esther have found another way? These debates continued through the centuries, as scholars and theologians wrestled with the ethical dimensions of the story. Some argued that the Jewish people were simply defending themselves against those who would have killed them, that every death was justified by the threat they faced. Others suggested that the response exceeded the bounds of self-defense, that something darker had emerged in the heat of battle. Still others pointed out that Esther specifically requested permission to continue the fighting for an additional day in Shushan, which suggested a desire for thoroughness, for eliminating every threat, for ensuring that no remnant of Haman's conspiracy survived. The text itself provides no easy answers. It simply records what happened. The Jewish people defended themselves. Their enemies fell. 75,000 died, and afterward, the Jews did not plunder the possessions of the dead, which set them apart from typical ancient warfare. They took no spoil. They sought no enrichment. They wanted only survival, safety, the ability to live in peace. This detail matters. It suggests that the violence was not motivated by greed or conquest, but by necessity. They killed because they had to, not because they wanted to. And when it was over, they stopped. In the broader sweep of biblical history, Esther's story occupies a unique place. It is set entirely in exile, in a foreign land, under a pagan king. There is no temple, no Jerusalem, no promised land. The people are scattered, vulnerable, dependent on the goodwill of rulers who do not worship their God. And yet they survive, they endure, they find ways to thrive even in captivity. Esther represents the reality of diaspora existence, the necessity of navigating between identities, the challenge of remaining faithful while living in a world that does not share your values. Her story would become especially relevant in later centuries, when Jews found themselves scattered across Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, living as minorities in empires and kingdoms that sometimes tolerated them and sometimes persecuted them. They looked to Esther as a model. She had hidden her identity when necessary. She had assimilated enough to survive, but not so much that she lost herself. She had waited for the right moment to reveal who she really was. She had used her position to save her people, and when the crisis came, she had not hesitated. She had acted with courage, wisdom, and determination. The figure of Mordecai also resonated through history. He represented the faithful Jew who refuses to compromise, even when compromise would be easier. He would not bow to Haman, even though his refusal put his entire community at risk. He maintained his religious practices openly, even in an empire where such visibility could be dangerous. He rose to power, not by abandoning his identity, but by embracing it. And when he had authority, he used it righteously, not for personal gain, but for the benefit of his people and the empire as a whole. Together, Esther and Mordecai embodied a kind of partnership that would become a template for Jewish survival. One operated in the palace, in the centers of power, using influence and access. The other remained visible in the public square, maintaining communal identity and religious practice. One was hidden, the other exposed. One was a woman, navigating systems of patriarchal power. The other was a man, challenging authority through defiance. Together, they achieved what neither could have accomplished alone. The legacy of Esther extends beyond the Jewish community. She became a symbol for women in positions of power who must navigate systems designed by and for men. She demonstrated that intelligence and courage matter more than physical strength. She showed that timing is everything, that knowing when to speak and when to remain silent can mean the difference between success and failure. She proved that one person in the right place at the right time can change history. Her story also speaks to the nature of providence, the way that God works through human agency rather than overriding it. Esther was not a puppet. She made choices. She took risks. She could have remained silent, and the text suggests that if she had, deliverance would have come from another source, but it came through her because she chose to act. This is the paradox of providence. God orchestrates circumstances, but humans must still step into those circumstances and do what needs to be done. The partnership between divine sovereignty and human responsibility is complete. The villain of the story, Haman, became a symbol of anti-Semitic hatred that would tragically repeat throughout history. His desire to annihilate an entire people simply because one man refused to bow to him reflects the irrational nature of ethnic hatred. It is not based on any real threat. It is not motivated by genuine grievances. It is rooted in pride, in the inability to tolerate difference, in the need to dominate and control. Haman's spiritual descendants would arise again and again, in different times and places, with the same goal, the elimination of the Jewish people. And each time, against impossible odds, the Jewish people would survive. The story of Esther became both a memory of past deliverance and a promise of future survival. The gallows that Haman built for Mordecai became a symbol of poetic justice, the idea that evil schemes ultimately destroy those who conceive them. This theme appears throughout biblical literature, but nowhere is it more dramatically illustrated than in Esther. The plot Haman devised for the Jews fell upon his own head. The gallows he constructed became his own place of execution. The wealth he accumulated went to his enemy. His position was given to the man he sought to destroy. His legacy became a curse. His name became something to be drowned out with noise and mockery. Every element of his plan was reversed, turned back upon him with devastating precision. This reversal points to something deeper in the moral structure of the universe. Evil may triumph temporarily, but it carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction. Pride leads to downfall. Hatred consumes the one who harbors it. Schemes to destroy others often result in self-destruction. This is not merely wishful thinking or religious optimism. It is a pattern that appears throughout history. Totalitarian regimes that seemed invincible collapse. Empires built on oppression eventually crumble. Individuals who rise through cruelty and manipulation tend to meet violent ends. The arc of history may be long, but it does bend toward justice. For the Jewish people, the story of Esther became inseparable from their identity as a people who survive against all odds. Persians, Greeks, Romans, Christians, Muslims, Nazis, empire after empire, ideology after ideology has tried to eliminate them, and yet they endure. They remain. They preserve their identity, their traditions, their faith. Esther's story explains why. Because at critical moments, when extinction seemed certain, someone stepped forward. Someone risked everything. Someone refused to be silent. And somehow, deliverance came. The absence of God's name in the book troubled some ancient readers. Why would a biblical text not mention God? Some scribes attempted to insert references to make the divine presence more explicit. But the Masoretic text that became standard preserves the original ambiguity. God is not named because God does not need to be named. His presence is obvious in the pattern of events, in the timing, in the outcomes. The book teaches that God is at work even when he seems absent, even when circumstances appear random, even when we cannot see his hand directly. This has profound implications for faith in difficult times. It suggests that the absence of obvious miracles does not mean the absence of God. It means that God is working in ways that require us to pay attention, to look for patterns, to recognize his fingerprints in the coincidences and connections. It means that faith is not about waiting for supernatural intervention, but about participating in the work of deliverance, about recognizing our moment and acting with courage. The relationship between Esther and Ahasuerus also deserves reflection. He was a flawed man, prone to rage and manipulation. He signed a decree to exterminate an entire people without even asking who they were. He was, by most measures, a bad king, and yet Esther worked with him, not against him. She understood that she could not change his nature, but she could influence his decisions. She accepted the reality of the system she lived in and worked within it to achieve the best possible outcome. This pragmatism is itself a kind of wisdom. Sometimes change comes not through revolution, but through patient influence, through strategic positioning, through knowing how to present truth in a way that power can hear. The festival of Purim continues to this day, thousands of years after the events it commemorates. Jewish communities around the world read the Megillah, give gifts, feast, and celebrate. Children dress in costumes, often as Esther or Mordecai, or even as Haman. It is a joyful holiday, one of the most festive in the Jewish calendar. But beneath the joy is the memory of how close they came to extinction, and the gratitude that once again, deliverance came just in time. The story refuses to be reduced to simple morals. It is too complex, too ambiguous, too human for that. Esther is not a flawless hero. She hid her identity for years. She participated in a system of sexual objectification. She ordered the deaths of thousands. But she also saved her people. She risked her life when she could have remained silent. She used her position for something greater than herself. She is a real human being, flawed and courageous, compromised and heroic, exactly the kind of person through whom God often chooses to work. Mordecai is not a simple saint either. His refusal to bow to Haman triggered the crisis that threatened all Jews. His pride, if that is what it was, endangered his entire community. But he also demonstrated unwavering faithfulness, raised an orphaned girl as his own daughter, exposed a conspiracy that would have killed the king, and governed wisely when given power. He is complicated, which makes him believable. Even Ahasuerus is not entirely villainous. He is weak, manipulated, driven by ego and appetite. But he also truly seems to love Esther in his own way. He grants her requests. He empowers her. He trusts her judgment ultimately more than that of his advisors. He is capable of being influenced toward good, even if he is not capable of initiating good on his own. Only Haman is irredeemable. He is pride incarnate, hatred personified, ambition without conscience. He represents the kind of evil that cannot be negotiated with, cannot be appeased, must be opposed absolutely. His inclusion in the story acknowledges that such evil exists, that sometimes enemies cannot be won over or reconciled, that survival requires resistance. The story of Esther is ultimately about choice. Esther chose to risk her life. Mordecai chose not to bow. The Jewish people chose to defend themselves. Ahasuerus chose to listen to his queen. Each choice mattered. Each decision shaped the outcome, and the cumulative effect of these choices was deliverance, survival, victory against impossible odds. This is why the story endures, because it tells us that we are not powerless, that even in systems designed to oppress us, we have agency, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that one voice can make a difference, that timing matters, and courage matters, and faithfulness matters, that God has not abandoned us, even when He seems silent. That deliverance can come from the most unexpected places, through the most unlikely people. The ruins of Shushan can still be visited today, in modern Iran. The palace where Esther walked, where she prepared herself to enter the king's presence unsummoned, where she revealed her identity and pleaded for her people, is long gone. But the story remains. It has outlasted empires. It has survived persecutions. It has been retold in every generation. And each time it is told, it carries the same message. You are here for such a time as this, and what you do matters more than you know.